the urban legend that locals swear is real and won't talk about at night. In the hollowed hills of northern West Virginia, where the trees grow thick and the valleys swallow sound like secrets never meant to be spoken, there's a stretch of road locals avoid after sundown. Not because it's dangerous in the usual way, no sharp curves, no history of accidents, but because something walks there, something that doesn't belong. The road is called Hollow Creek Lane, winding through the unincorporated township of Gormley Mills, a place so small it doesn't appear on most maps, and so quiet that even birds seem reluctant to sing past twilight. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was late autumn in the year 1987 when the first official report came in, not to the sheriff's office, but whispered between neighbors over cracked porcelain cups of black coffee. A woman by the name of Thalia Mercer, who lived alone in a weather-worn clapboard house just off Hollow Creek Lane, claimed she saw a figure standing at the edge of her cornfield one evening. She said it wasn't tall, not exactly, but wrong its limbs too long, its head tilted at an angle that made her stomach twist. It didn't move, didn't blink. Just stood there, facing her porch, as if waiting for an invitation she had no intention of giving. Thalia was known in Gormley Mills as a practical woman church every Sunday, grew her own vegetables, kept a loaded 38 inches her nightstand since her husband passed in '69. So when she called Sheriff Harlan Voss 3 nights later, voice trembling like a plucked wire, he listened. He arrived with his flashlight cutting through the fog, boots crunching on frost-laced gravel. The house was dark except for a single lamp glowing behind the kitchen curtain. Thalia met him at the door, wrapped in a faded quilt, eyes wide and bloodshot. "It's back," she whispered. "Same spot, in the field." They walked together toward the edge of the property, the beam of the flashlight slicing through the mist. Nothing moved, no footprints in the damp soil, no snapped branches or disturbed earth. Just silence, thick and heavy, like wool pressed against the ears. Then, from somewhere deep in the corn rows, a sound. A low, wet clicking, like stones being rolled in oil. Sheriff Voss aimed the light, the stalks swayed slightly, though there was no wind, and then nothing. The sound stopped. The air stilled. They stood there for nearly 10 minutes, neither speaking, both feeling watched. Sheriff Voss told Thalia to stay indoors, lock the doors, and call him if anything changed. He drove away slowly, scanning the rearview mirror until the house disappeared behind the trees. He filed a report the next morning, possible hallucination due to stress or sleep deprivation, but privately he marked a note in his personal ledger, Hollow Creek, November 3rd, Thalia Mercer. Heard something, felt something, can't explain. That winter was harsh, long stretches of snow, power outages, roads blocked for days. But people in Gormley Mills noticed other things too. Dogs refused to go into backyards after dark. Chickens vanished without signs of struggle. And on still nights, when the moon hung low and yellow, some swore they heard voices calling from the woods, voices that didn't sound human. Children were kept inside after 6, porch lights stayed on all night. Conversations about Hollow Creek Lane ended quickly, often with a shake of the head and a muttered phrase, "Best not talk about it." Then, in early spring of 1988, a teenager named Corwin Bellwether went missing. He was 16, lanky, with a stutter he'd been trying to overcome since childhood. Corwin liked to walk at night, said it helped him think. His mother, Elspeth, would beg him not to go down Hollow Creek Lane, but he always shrugged and said, "Nothing out there but trees and dirt." On the night of March 14th, he left after dinner with a notebook in his pocket, claiming he was writing poetry for school. He never came back. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. Bloodhounds picked up his scent near the creek bed, then lost it abruptly, as if he'd stepped off the face of the earth. A week later, his boots were found placed neatly side by side at the base of an old sycamore, roots tangled like knuckles. No body, no blood, no explanation. The official cause of disappearance? Presumed runaway. But in Gormley Mills, folks knew better. They looked at each other in church pews, eyes shadowed, lips tight. They didn't say much. But they stopped walking that road entirely. Years passed, the story faded mostly. New families moved into the valley, drawn by cheap land and quiet living. They laughed at the old tales. Ghosts, they'd say. Come on. But then, little things started happening. Lights flickering in empty rooms, cold spots in hallways. One woman, Miriam Huxley, claimed she saw a figure in her bathroom mirror one night, a man with sunken eyes and a mouth sewn shut with black thread. She screamed, turned on the light, and it was gone. The next morning, she found a single muddy footprint on the linoleum leading from the bathtub to the door, but the windows were locked. The house had no basement access. In 2005, a documentary crew from Pittsburgh arrived, determined to debunk the myth. They set up cameras along Hollow Creek Lane, motion sensors, audio recorders. For 2 nights, nothing. On the third, at precisely 2:13 in the morning, every device failed simultaneously. The footage showed only static, but audio captured a whisper, faint at first, then clearer. You're not supposed to see. When the lead technician reviewed the files, he noticed something else. In the background, beneath the static, a rhythmic tapping 3 slow knocks, pause, then 2 quick ones, like a code or a warning. He played it for an elderly resident named Otis Grindle, who'd lived in Gormley Mills his entire life. Otis listened once, turned pale, and said, "That's how they used to signal before the mine collapsed in '49. Only the men trapped underground knew that pattern." He refused to speak another word on the subject. By 2012, Hollow Creek Lane was officially closed. The county put up a rusted gate, chained and padlocked, with a sign that read, "Road closed, no trespassing." But kids still dared each other to go. Teens from nearby towns would drive up on weekends, flashlights in hand, laughing nervously as they approached the gate. Most turned back before reaching the tree line. But a few went further. One such group, in October of 2017, included a boy named Jory Linthwaite. He was 17, curious, raised on horror films and internet creepypastas. He didn't believe in ghosts, he believed in adrenaline. That night, he and 3 friends cut the chain with bolt cutters and slipped through. They brought cameras, a Ouija board, even a EVP recorder. They set up camp near the old sycamore where Corwin's boots were found. At first, it was jokes. Flashlight beams dancing through the trees, mocking whispers. Then, around 1 o'clock, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath came out in thick clouds. Their phones died, one by one. Then the recorder picked up a voice, clear, childlike, but distorted. "Don't look behind you." All 4 spun around. Nothing there. But when they turned back, the Ouija board planchette had moved on its own, spelling "Leave now." They packed up fast. As they ran toward the gate, Jory tripped. His friends thought he'd caught his foot on a root, but when they stopped and turned, Jory wasn't getting up. He was staring into the trees, mouth open, eyes wide with terror. "It's watching," he whispered. "It's smiling." They pulled him up, half dragging him the rest of the way. The chain was intact again, no sign it had ever been cut. Jory didn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he described a face pale, stretched, with too many teeth. He said it stood between the trees, perfectly still, just smiling. And then, in a voice not his own, he said, "It knows my name." After that, the county welded the gate shut, installed surveillance cameras. Within a week, all 4 cameras malfunctioned. Footage showed nothing but snow, even though the night was clear. And in the corner of one frame, barely visible, a shadow tall, thin, with fingers too long to be real, reached slowly toward the lens. To this day, residents of Gormley Mills won't go near Hollow Creek Lane after dark. If you ask them why, they'll change the subject, or give you a look one that says, "You don't want to know." But if you visit in late autumn, when the leaves turn brittle and the wind carries the scent of damp earth and decay, stand at the edge of that road at dusk. Listen, really listen. You might hear the faintest echo of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. You might feel the air thicken, your breath shorten, your skin prickle as if unseen eyes have settled on you. And if you're foolish enough to step past the gate, to walk just a few yards down that cracked asphalt path, you may notice something worse. The silence isn't empty. It's waiting. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the moon hides behind clouds and the world holds its breath, you can hear it breathe back. They say it mimics voices, calls out names in familiar tones, your mother's lullaby, your best friend's laugh, just to lure you deeper. But those who've heard it warn, don't answer, don't turn. Don't even think about looking back. Because once it has your attention, it never lets go. There's a reason the elders in Gormley Mills whisper prayers before bedtime, why parents check their children's windows twice, why on certain nights the entire town seems to go dark at once, as if hiding. It's not superstition, it's survival. And if you find yourself near Hollow Creek Lane when the clock strikes midnight, remember this. The stories aren't legends. They're warnings. And the thing in the woods? It remembers every person who didn't listen. Even now, in the hush between heartbeats, in the space where shadows grow longer than they should, something stirs. Not far, not loud, but close enough to hear you breathe. So tell me again, where are you listening from? And more importantly, are you alone? A ghost ship drifted into port with a fresh meal on the stove. It was the winter of 1987 when the fishing trawler Marianne V slipped silently into the harbor of Gloucester, Massachusetts, just before dawn on a brittle February morning. No lights flickered from her deck, no voices called out, no radio signals preceded her arrival. She came like a shadow drifting through fog, her bow nudging gently against Pier 6 as if guided by unseen hands. The first to notice her was Elias Thorne, a weathered dockhand with 40 years of salt in his bones and frost still clinging to the brim of his wool cap. He'd arrived early to check lobster traps, steam rising from his coffee cup curling into the pale gray sky. When he saw the vessel listing slightly, paint peeling like old skin, name barely legible beneath grime, he froze. His breath caught, not from cold, but from instinct. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? Elias approached slowly, boots crunching over frozen patches of seaweed and ice. The Marianne V had been reported missing 3 weeks prior, last seen off the Georges Bank during a sudden nor'easter that had swallowed 2 other boats whole. The Coast Guard had called off search efforts after 10 days, assuming all hands lost, and yet here she was, intact, afloat, and strangely, undisturbed. No signs of storm damage, no gaping holes in the hull, nothing overturned on deck, just silence. A thick, suffocating silence that pressed against Elias's ears like cotton. He called out once, twice, no answer. Then, steeling himself, he climbed aboard. The moment his boot touched the deck, he felt it a chill that wasn't from the wind. It coiled up from the wood beneath him, sharp and unnatural, as though the ship itself were holding its breath. He moved toward the wheelhouse. The door hung open, swaying slightly with the motion of the tide. Inside, the radio crackled with static, a faint loop of Morse code repeating endlessly 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, SOS, over and over, though the power should have been dead. The logbook lay open on the chart table, the last entry dated February 3rd. Heavy fog. Currents erratic. Can't see land. Something in the water. The handwriting grew jagged, frantic, as if written under duress. Elias flipped back a few pages. Earlier entries spoke of routine hauls, calm seas, even jokes about Captain Rourke's terrible stew. But then, around January 28th, the tone shifted. Crew restless. Emery claims he saw lights beneath the surface, not bioluminescence, too steady, too deep. Emery Vale, third mate, quiet man from inland Maine who rarely spoke unless spoken to. He'd joined the crew only 2 months prior, replacing a man who'd quit mid-season, saying the boat felt haunted. Emery hadn't believed in ghosts, or so the others said. But his journal, found later tucked inside a duffel bag below decks, told a different story. Elias descended the narrow metal stairs into the galley, flashlight beam trembling in his grip, and there, on the cast iron stove, sat a pot, still warm. Steam curled lazily from its cracked lid, carrying the scent of onions, potatoes, and something meaty beef, maybe, or pork. A spoon rested against the rim, crusted with congealing gravy. Beside it, a chipped blue mug held tea, long gone cold, but unmistakably brewed that morning. Or the night before. Or whenever. Time didn't seem to matter here. He backed away, heart hammering. No one could have boarded without being seen. The harbor was monitored, no small craft had entered after midnight, and yet the meal was fresh. As if someone had stepped away just seconds ago. Then he heard it. A soft clink. From the mess hall, like a fork tapping a plate. He turned slowly. The door stood ajar. Darkness pooled beyond it. He pushed it open with the toe of his boot. Tables bolted to the floor. Benches intact. Nothing out of place. Except on the farthest table, set for four plates, each with a portion of stew untouched, forks laid neatly beside them, napkins folded, salt and pepper shakers aligned perfectly. And at the head of the table, a fifth plate, empty. But the chair was pulled out, as if someone had just risen. Elias didn't scream, he didn't run, he simply stood there, flashlight shaking, breath coming in short white puffs, until the sound came, again not a clink this time, but a whisper, faint, guttural, from the sleeping quarters below. He didn't go down, not then. He scrambled back onto the pier, shouting for help, voice raw with panic. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, the pot on the stove was cold, the steam had vanished. But the stew remained, uneaten, perfectly preserved, as if time had paused mid-bite. Captain Silas Rourke, grizzled veteran of 30 seasons at sea, was never found. Nor were his three crewmen, Emery Vale, Harlan Pike, and Jocelyn Crow, the youngest at 23, who'd signed on to save money for nursing school in Portland. Their personal effects were still in their bunks. Photos of family, letters half-written, toothbrushes damp. But no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, just absence. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. Divers scoured the hull, sonar scanned the seabed, forensic teams analyzed the stew, confirmed it contained beef, carrots, and barley, cooked within hours of the ship's arrival. No toxins, no hallucinogens, nothing abnormal. Yet every sailor who boarded the Marianne V afterward reported the same thing. The smell of cooking food, even when the stove was cold, the sensation of being watched from empty rooms, whispers in low, guttural tones, always just beyond hearing. One junior officer, Lyle Mander, claimed he saw Emery Vale standing at the railing at 3:17 in the morning, staring into the fog, mouthing words he couldn't understand. When approached, the figure dissolved like mist. The ship was towed to dry dock, declared unsalvageable not due to structural damage, but because morale among crews plummeted. Men refused to work on her. Mechanics reported tools going missing, only to reappear in locked lockers. Electricians swore lights turned on by themselves, dim and flickering, casting long shadows that moved against the walls. By April, the decision was made. The Marianne V would be scuttled, sunk in deep water beyond the continental shelf, where currents would carry her far from shipping lanes. The ceremony was brief. No flags, no speeches, just a single flare shot into the twilight sky as charges detonated along her keel. She sank slowly, bow first, vanishing beneath the waves with an almost ceremonial grace. But here's what they didn't report, what never made the official logs. 3 days later, a Norwegian freighter, the Fjordwind, radioed the Boston Maritime Authority from 50 miles east of Sable Island. They'd spotted wreckage, part of a wooden table, scorched at the edges, floating amid a slick of oil. Attached to it, miraculously preserved in a sealed plastic sleeve, was a page torn from Emery Vale's journal. The handwriting was frantic, ink smudged as if written in haste or fear. "They're not dead. We never left. The ship doesn't sink. It drifts, it waits, it feeds. The stove is always warm, the table is always set, and one day it will come back. With a fresh meal. For us." The page was authenticated, handwriting matched samples from Emery's personnel file, ink consistent with pens issued to crew, but how it survived explosion, fire, and ocean pressure, no scientist could explain. And then, on the evening of December 9th, 2012, a local fisherman named Corwin Haskins reported seeing a vessel matching the Marianne V's description near Jeffrey's Ledge. Fog was heavy that night, visibility near zero. He claimed the ship passed within 20 feet of his boat, lights dark, decks empty. But from her galley window, a yellow glow pulsed like a stove lit below. He tried hailing her, no response. When he turned to grab his radio, she was gone. Vanished into the mist. No wreckage was found, no trace on radar. The Coast Guard dismissed it as a mirage, a trick of the light. But Corwin insisted, said he smelled stew in the air, beef, carrots, barley, and underneath something darker, metallic, like blood. To this day, Gloucester fishermen avoid that stretch of water after sunset, especially in winter, especially when the fog rolls in thick and silent. Some say if you listen closely on still nights, you can hear the Morse code 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots echoing from beneath the waves. Others claim to see a faint glow beneath the surface, drifting with the current like a lantern in the deep. And every year, around February 10th, a single bouquet of wilted wildflowers appears on the railing of Pier 6. No note, no signature. Just flowers brown at the edges, salt stiffened, as if carried across the sea. Left there, some say, by someone who never came home. But perhaps the most unsettling detail, the one that lingers in the mind long after the story ends, is this. When authorities finally cleaned out the galley before scuttling the ship, they found something odd in the cupboard. A can of stew. Store-bought, label faded, best before date, October 12th, 1986. Expired over a year earlier, yet the can was warm to the touch. And when opened, it was full. Steaming. Fresh. As if just heated. No one ate it. It was incinerated along with the rest. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right through the rigging of moored boats, people swear they can smell it. That rich, savory aroma. Onions, potatoes, meat slow-cooked for hours. And they wonder, who was it meant for? And more importantly, is the table still set? The sea keeps its secrets well, but every now and then it returns them to drift into port, unannounced, uninvited, with a fresh meal on the stove and chairs waiting to be filled. So the next time you walk past an empty dock and the wind carries the faint scent of cooking food, ask yourself, was that the neighbor's dinner? Or something else? Something older? Something hungrier? Something that remembers your name and knows when you'll be home? The robber who never touched the floor and never got caught. In the winter of 1987, when snow fell like whispers over the city of Pittsburgh and street lamps flickered beneath a sky heavy with clouds, a man named Thaddeus Vale moved through the shadows with a silence so complete it defied belief. He wasn't tall, nor was he broad, just 5'9", wiry with fingers long enough to dance across piano keys or slip between window frames without a sound. His eyes, a pale gray like thawing ice, missed nothing. And though he stole from banks, jewelry stores, and even the homes of the wealthy in Shadyside and Fox Chapel, no one ever saw him run, no one ever heard his footsteps, and not a single footprint was ever found leading away from the scene. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? It started on a night thick with fog, the kind that clung to coat collars and muffled the distant wail of trains along the Monongahela River. The date was December 18th, just 3 days before Christmas. The First National Trust on Fifth Avenue had closed at 5, its vault sealed, alarms armed, security guards patrolling in pairs. Yet, by 10 past 2 in the morning, someone had bypassed every system without tripping a wire, without leaving fingerprints, without setting off motion detectors calibrated to sense the flutter of a moth's wing. What they found the next morning chilled the blood of the manager, a man named Harlan Wexford, who arrived at 6:30 sharp with coffee steaming in a paper cup. The front door was locked. The glass unbroken, the alarm panel glowed green, fully operational. But inside, the vault stood open, its steel door yawning wide like a slack jaw. $200,000 in cash, mostly 20s and 50s, bundled in rubber bands, was gone. Also missing, a collection of rare gold coins, appraised at over $400,000, belonging to a reclusive collector from Sewickley. And yet, there were no signs of forced entry, no scuff marks on the floor, no grease on the keypad, nothing. Only one thing puzzled the investigators more than the theft itself, the surveillance footage. On the tape, recorded from a camera mounted high in the corner of the lobby, there was no intruder, just darkness. Static. Then, at exactly 2:12 a.m., a flicker, a distortion, like heat rising from asphalt. For 3 seconds, the image warped. When it cleared, the vault door was slightly ajar. But no figure appeared, no hand reached in, no shadow passed. It was as if the money had simply decided to leave on its own. By midweek, newspapers across Pennsylvania carried the headline, "Phantom Thief Strikes Pittsburgh." Radio stations played eerie synth music behind breathless reports. Police Chief Lyle Mancini held a press conference, his voice tight with frustration, insisting that no man can walk through walls and vowing that the perpetrator would be caught. But deep down, even he felt a chill he couldn't explain. Because this wasn't the first time. 3 months earlier, in September of 1987, the Regal Jewelers on Walnut Street had been hit under nearly identical circumstances. Surveillance showed nothing. Alarms never sounded. The safe opened as if by magic. A string of black pearls, once worn by a silent film star, vanished without a trace. And again, no footprints. No fingerprints. No scent for canine units to follow. Then, in November, it happened at the Carnegie Savings and Loan in Mount Lebanon. This time, a motion sensor near the back office did register something, but only for half a second. The reading? A weightless disturbance, like air shifting in a vacuum. Investigators dismissed it as equipment malfunction, but Thaddeus Vail knew better. He wasn't a criminal by birth, nor was he driven by greed. Born in a coal mining town in West Virginia Welch, population 3,000, he'd grown up in a house with no running water and a roof that leaked when it rained. His father died in a mine collapse when Thaddeus was 9. His mother worked double shifts at a diner, her hands cracked from dishwater and cold. By the time he was 16, he'd taught himself to pick locks, not because he wanted to steal, but because he needed medicine for his younger sister, Lyra, who suffered from seizures doctors said were nervous in origin and expensive to treat. His first break-in was clumsy, a pharmacy at midnight, gloves too big, heart pounding like a war drum. He took only what he needed, phenobarbital, syringes, a bottle of cod liver oil, left a note behind, written in careful script, "I will repay you." TV. No one ever came looking. Over the years, he grew quieter, faster, more precise. He studied architecture, mechanics, airflow patterns, and human behavior. He learned how to move without displacing air, how to step where pressure sensors weren't calibrated, how to exploit blind spots in infrared fields. But his greatest skill, his secret, was not technology. It was timing. Thaddeus didn't walk during heists. He floated. Not literally, of course, but close enough to fool machines, cameras, and instincts alike. Through a combination of controlled breathing, muscle relaxation, and an almost meditative state of balance, he could reduce his physical impact to near zero. He wore custom shoes lined with aerogel foam, lighter than air, insulating, silent. His clothing, tailored from a blend of synthetic fibers used in aerospace gear, absorbed light and muffled sound. He moved in rhythm with the building's natural vibrations, the hum of HVAC systems, the creak of settling beams, so that his presence became part of the background noise. And he never touched the floor. Not directly. Instead, he used a technique he called shadow stepping, placing each foot on the very edge of tiles, where grout met wall, or balancing on the lip of a baseboard, distributing his weight across multiple micropoints. In some cases, he'd enter through ventilation shafts, descending slowly on ropes made of braided Kevlar thread, thin as spider silk, strong as steel. He'd hang suspended above carpets, vaults, marble floors reaching down, with tools shaped like fishing rods to retrieve items without ever grounding himself. To the world, it seemed impossible. To him, it was survival. By early January of 1988, the FBI had assigned Agent Rhoda Keene to the case. A veteran of white-collar crime divisions, she'd transferred from Quantico after solving a series of art thefts in New Orleans using behavioral profiling. She was sharp, skeptical, and immune to sensationalism, but even she paused the first time she watched the grainy bank footage from Fifth Avenue. "There's no one there," she muttered, rewinding the tape for the 7th time. Her partner, Dale Haskins, leaned forward. "Maybe it's a glitch." "No," she said, voice low. "Look at the dust motes. See how they shift right before the vault opens? Something passed through. Something quiet." They began cross-referencing all previous unsolved thefts in the region. 8 in total, dating back to 1984. All shared the same pattern: no entry, no exit, no evidence. And in 6 of them, weather reports mentioned unusually dense fog on the night of the crime. Coincidence? Possibly. But then, on January 15th, 1988, the unthinkable happened again. This time, it was the home of Arthur Pembroke, a retired steel magnate living in a gated estate in Sewickley Heights. The mansion had 20 rooms, a private gallery, and a security system designed by a former CIA contractor. Motion sensors, laser grids, thermal imaging, everything. At 1:43 in the morning, the system registered a temperature fluctuation in the east wing. Not enough to trigger an alert, just a brief dip like a breath against glass. When Pembroke's housekeeper arrived at 7, she found the display case in the study shattered, not broken outward, but inward, as if crushed from within. Missing a platinum pocket watch engraved with the coordinates of the Titanic's final resting place, and a letter signed by Thomas Edison promising collaboration on a wireless illumination device. Again, no prints, no alarms, no sign of struggle, but this time there was something new. On the marble floor, just beneath the shattered glass, lay a single playing card. The Queen of Spades, flipped face up. Agent Keene stared at it in the evidence photo, her pulse quickening. "He's communicating," she whispered. Haskins frowned. "With whom?" "With us," she said. "Or maybe with someone else." She ordered a full forensic sweep of all prior crime scenes, anything left behind, no matter how insignificant. And 2 days later, in a dusty envelope from the Regal Jewelers case, they found it a matchbook from a diner in Clarksburg, West Virginia. On the back, scribbled in pencil, "For Lyra. Soon." Keene traced the diner's records. Only one person had asked for directions to Welch that week, a man matching Thaddeus Vale's description, paying in exact change, wearing a long coat and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She flew to West Virginia the next morning. Welch was a ghost of its former self, storefronts boarded up, miners out of work, children playing in empty lots where company houses once stood. She found the Vale residence, easily a sagging frame house on Sycamore Street, paint peeling, porch steps rotted, no lights on, no car in the driveway, but smoke curled from the chimney. She knocked. Silence. Then, the soft click of a lock. The door opened just enough to reveal a woman, thin, pale, wrapped in a wool blanket. Her eyes were red, her hair tied back with a frayed ribbon. "Yes?" she asked, voice hoarse. "Mrs. Vale," Keene said gently. "I'm Special Agent Rhoda Keene, FBI. I'm looking for your son, Thaddeus." The woman didn't flinch, didn't gasp, just exhaled slowly, like someone releasing a burden. "He's not here," she said, "and he won't come back." "Why not?" "Because he's done what he needed to do." Keene stepped forward. "Ma'am, your son is suspected in multiple thefts, over $1 million in losses. People are scared. We need to talk to him." The woman smiled faintly. "Talk to him? You think he'd let you catch him? You think he leaves tracks because he wants to be found?" She opened the door wider. Inside, the room was sparse wood stove, cot, bookshelf, crammed with engineering manuals and old medical journals. On the wall, a map of Pittsburgh was pinned with tiny red dots, each marking a location of a theft. But in the center, a photograph. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, smiling beside a hospital bed. A caption beneath, handwritten, "Lyra's first seizure-free year. She's alive," the woman said softly. "Thanks to him, the medicine, the specialists, the treatments they said we could never afford. He gave her time. 5 years. She passed last April. Peacefully." Keene felt her throat tighten. "And now?" she asked. "Now he's gone," the mother said. "Where? I don't know. Maybe helping someone else. Maybe just resting." She handed Keene a small box wrapped in brown paper. "This came yesterday. No return address. Just your name." Keene opened it. Inside, the Edison letter, the Titanic watch, and a note on thin stationery. "Return these. They were borrowed. T.V." No arrest warrant was ever served, no trial convened. The FBI closed the case in March of 1988, citing insufficient evidence and lack of identifiable suspect. The media moved on. The public forgot. But in quiet corners among locksmiths, security consultants, and urban legends whispered in police academies, Thaddeus Vale became myth. They say he still moves. On nights when fog rolls in from the rivers, when the wind carries the scent of coal and frost, some claim to see a figure drifting past windows, never casting a shadow, never making a sound. They say he doesn't steal anymore. They say he helps. A wallet returned to a college student who lost it on the T. A stack of bills slipped under the door of a family facing eviction. A prescription filled anonymously at a pharmacy in McKeesport. And sometimes, if you look closely at the snow-covered ground after such events, you'll notice something strange. No footprints. Just the faint impression of edges like someone walked on the very border of the world, never quite landing, never touching, never caught, and perhaps never meant to be. The preacher's doomsday calendar was wrong except for one date. In the quiet town of Harlan, nestled deep within the Appalachian foothills of eastern Kentucky, a man named Thaddeus Vale once stood atop a rusted grain silo on the edge of an abandoned farm, his arms outstretched beneath a bruised twilight sky. It was the autumn of 1998, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and burning leaves, crisp with the promise of change, or so he claimed. Clad in a long charcoal-colored coat that fluttered like crow's wings in the wind, Thaddeus held aloft a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with intricate diagrams, celestial alignments, and what he called the true calendar of divine reckoning. He wasn't a pastor in any official denomination, nor did he preach from a pulpit, but people came all the same, drawn by whispers, by fear, by a hunger for certainty in uncertain times. He spoke not in sermons, but in riddles wrapped in prophecy, warning that the world would end in stages, each date marked by fire, flood, or silence. The first, he said, would come on the 3rd day of April, 2001, a great falling from the sky, a judgment upon the proud towers of men. Then, on the 9th day of July, 2003, rivers would run black and the stars would blink out for 7 hours. By the winter solstice of 2005, he declared, every mirror in the world would crack at exactly 3:17 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. His followers, numbering nearly 400 at their peak-sold homes, quit jobs, and gathered in communal shelters built from scrap wood and salvaged metal, waiting. But none of it happened. April passed without incident. July brought only heat and thunderstorms. On that winter morning in 2005, people woke to find their mirrors intact, their coffee still warm, the world stubbornly ordinary. Disillusionment spread like frost across a window pane. Families left, supplies dwindled, the shelters fell into disrepair, overtaken by kudzu and foxes. Thaddeus himself vanished shortly after, last seen boarding a Greyhound bus bound for Memphis, his journal tucked beneath his arm, his eyes hollow with something between regret and defiance. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Now, fast forward to the spring of 2023. A young archivist named Elowyn Price, originally from Asheville, North Carolina, though raised mostly in rural Ohio, was sorting through a donation box at the Ossuary Archive in Lexington, a little-known repository for forgotten religious texts and apocalyptic ephemera. Among crumbling pamphlets and hand-drawn star charts, she found it. Thaddeus Vale's journal, its spine cracked, its pages brittle as dried petals. At first, she paid it little mind, just another relic of millennial panic, another voice lost to time, but then, late one rainy Tuesday night, she flipped to the final page. There, in faded ink, was a single line written in a trembling hand. And when all else has failed, look to the 7th hour of the 13th day of October, 2023. That one I saw clearly. Elowyn paused. She checked the date on her phone. October 13th, 2023, exactly 1 week away. She told no one at first. Not her supervisor, Dr. Calix Renner, a stern man with wire-rimmed glasses who believed fervently in cataloging, not interpreting. Not even her roommate, a folk musician named Jory, who played a battered upright bass and claimed to speak in dreams with dead jazz trumpeters. But she couldn't let it go. There was something about the phrasing, the specificity, the weight of it. It didn't sound like the rambling of a madman. It sounded like a confession. So she began to dig. Thaddeus had based his calendar on a blend of numerology, obscure biblical exegesis, and astronomical cycles, particularly the precession of the equinoxes and the rare alignment of Jupiter and Saturn known as the Great Conjunction. Most of his calculations were flawed, built on misreadings of ancient texts and self-invented ciphers. But this final date, October 13th, 2023, coincided with nothing major in the astronomical record. No eclipse, no meteor shower, no planetary alignment of significance. And yet Elowyn noticed something strange. On that exact day, at precisely 7 o'clock in the evening Eastern Daylight Time, the moon would be at perigee, the closest point to Earth in its orbit, and positioned directly over the central United States. At that moment, the sun would have just set in Harlan, Kentucky. Coincidence? Perhaps. But then she found a second clue. Buried in an old police report from November of 2005, a year after Thaddeus disappeared, a deputy in Harlan County mentioned investigating a small fire at the remains of one of the doomsday shelters. Inside, scorched but legible, was a chalkboard with the same date, October 13th, 2023. Beneath it, someone had written, "It isn't destruction, it's remembrance." Elowen's breath caught. She booked a train to Harlan. The journey took nearly 10 hours, winding through the Blue Ridge Mountains, past coal towns with sagging porches, and churches painted white with peeling trim. When she arrived, the air was thick with the smell of pine and distant rain. Autumn had already begun to paint the hills in amber and rust. She checked into a modest inn called the Hollow Pines Motel, room number 6, where the heater rattled and the curtains smelled faintly of mildew. That evening, she drove out to the old shelter site, guided by GPS and a hand-drawn map she'd copied from the journal. The structure was gone, only a concrete slab remained, half swallowed by ivy and wild blackberry vines. But as she stepped onto it, something shifted in the air. A stillness. A hush, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. She pulled out her phone, opened the voice recorder, and whispered, "It's October 12th. Tomorrow at 7 p.m., I'll be back." She returned at 6:45 the next evening. The sky was overcast, pale gray, streaked with violet at the edges. A cool wind moved through the trees, making the leaves shiver like hands in prayer. She sat on the edge of the slab, her jacket pulled tight, watching the minutes tick by on her watch. 6:52. 6:55. 6:58. At 6:59, the wind stopped. Not gradually, not fading. It ceased as if cut by a blade. Silence pressed down, thick and unnatural. No birds, no crickets. Even the distant hum of a highway seemed to vanish. Her pulse quickened. She glanced around, half expecting shadows to move on their own. Then, at exactly 7 p.m., a single tone echoed through the valley, low, resonant, like a bell struck deep underground. It lasted only 3 seconds, then faded, and just as quickly, the wind returned, rustling the branches, breaking the stillness. Elowen stood frozen, her skin prickled. She reached into her bag and pulled out a portable spectrum analyzer she'd borrowed from a physics professor friend, something meant to detect electromagnetic anomalies. To her astonishment, it had recorded a brief spike in low-frequency waves at exactly 7 o'clock frequency, matching no known natural source, and lasting precisely 2.8 seconds. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. Was it man-made, a military test, a geological event, or was it impossibly something else? She spent the next 6 months chasing answers. She interviewed elderly locals who remembered Thaddeus Vale, some with reverence, others with scorn. One woman, Mavis Cray, who had been 16 when the shelters were built, recalled seeing Thaddeus standing alone at midnight on New Year's Eve, 2000, staring at the stars and weeping. He kept saying, "I got most of it wrong, but one day I saw it clear." Another man, a retired geologist named Silas Tovey, confirmed that the region sat atop a network of ancient quartz veins, minerals known to amplify electromagnetic signals under certain conditions. Could Thaddeus have known? Had he discovered something by accident, by vision, by madness that science had yet to explain? Elowen published her findings in a small academic journal, careful not to claim proof, only possibility. She titled it Anomalous Temporal Events and the Psychology of Prophetic Failure. It garnered little attention except from one person. A letter arrived at the archive 6 weeks later, postmarked from Boise, Idaho. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typewritten, "You were there. I saw you on the slab. You heard it too. I've waited 20 years. He told me it would happen only once. Only for those who believed enough to doubt. Tell me, did you feel it?" Not sound, not vibration, but memory, as if the world remembered something it had forgotten. No signature. Just that. Elowen never replied. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the streetlights flicker outside her window in Columbus, where she now lives, she opens the journal again. She runs her fingers over that final line. That one, I saw clearly. And she wonders, was it a hoax? A delusion? Or did Thaddeus Vale, in all his flawed brilliance, truly glimpse one moment not of destruction, but of resonance. A single date when time bent just enough for something to slip through? Not the end of the world, but a whisper from it. Think about that. What if the apocalypse isn't fire and ruin? What if it's a moment so quiet, so precise, that only the ones who are truly listening will ever know it happened? And what if it already did? October 13th, 2023, 7 o'clock in the evening, Eastern Daylight Time. In a field in Kentucky, beneath a motionless sky, a tone rang out, brief, unexplained, undeniable. And somewhere, perhaps, Thaddeus Vale smiled. Because even prophets get things wrong. But sometimes, just once, they're right. And when they are, the world doesn't end. It simply pauses and listens. Missing 411, vanished in broad daylight 20 feet from family. On a crisp October afternoon in the year 1997, beneath a sky of pale blue streaked with wisps of cloud like torn lace, the small town of Pine Hollow, nestled in the rugged folds of northern Idaho, seemed untouched by urgency or fear. The air carried the faint scent of pine resin and damp earth, remnants of an early morning frost that had melted under the sun's gentle gaze. Children played near the edge of the woods behind their homes, their laughter echoing across open fields where goldenrod swayed in the breeze. It was one of those rare autumn days when time felt suspended, when even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? At precisely 3:28 in the afternoon on the 14th day of October, 1997, Elias Thornwood, a quiet boy of 9 years old, with eyes the color of storm clouds and hair so dark it almost swallowed the light, vanished without a sound. He wasn't taken from a dark alley, nor snatched during a thunderstorm, nor lured into the shadows by a stranger with hollow promises. No, he disappeared in broad daylight, just 20 feet from where his family stood, gathered in their backyard for a simple Sunday gathering. The Thornwoods lived in a modest 2-story cedar house at the end of Hemlock Lane, a gravel road fringed by towering pines and thick underbrush. Their property backed onto the dense expanse of the Bitterroot National Forest, where deer trails wound through ferns and fallen logs, and silence often pressed against the ears like cotton. That day, Elias's grandmother, Margaret, had come down from Missoula to visit. His father, Harlan, a mechanic with calloused hands and a voice like gravel rolling in a tin can, was grilling bratwurst over a charcoal fire. His mother, Lila, wore her favorite lavender apron and stirred a pot of apple cider spiced with cinnamon and cloves. His older sister, Cora, then 11, sat cross-legged on a patch of grass, braiding daisies into a crown while humming an old folk tune passed down from her great-aunt. Elias had been playing hide-and-seek with the neighbor's son, Joran Pike, a wiry boy with freckles scattered across his nose like pepper. They'd agreed on boundaries, the fence line, the old oak tree with the tire swing, and the edge of the woods, which both parents had strictly forbidden them from crossing. Not beyond the stump, Harlan had said earlier, pointing to a moss-covered log half buried in ivy. That forest doesn't forgive mistakes. It was just after 3 o'clock when Joran ducked behind the woodpile near the garage, giggling as Elias counted aloud, his back pressed against the cherry tree in the center of the yard. 10, 9, 8. His voice rang clear and bright. Birds chirped in the hedges. A dog barked somewhere down the lane. The world felt safe, predictable. When Elias reached 0, he turned, scanned the yard, and called out, "Ready or not?" He found Joran quickly, bursting from behind the logs with a triumphant whoop. Then came the next round. This time, Elias hid. He darted toward the far side of the yard, near the rusted garden shed where tomato vines curled around broken trellises. He crouched low, pressing himself into the shadow of the wall, heart thudding with excitement. The plan was simple. He would stay hidden until Joran gave up and called his name. But he never emerged. 3:28. That's when Cora first noticed. She looked up from her flower crown, squinting across the lawn. "Where's Elias?" She asked, her voice light at first, tinged only with mild curiosity. No one answered immediately. Harlan flipped a sausage with tongs. Lila poured cider into mugs. Margaret rocked gently in the folding chair, knitting needles clicking. "Elias?" Cora called again, louder this time. Still nothing. Joran frowned. "He was right here." I saw him go behind the shed. Harlan set the tongs down. Elias, enough hiding now. Silence. Then, movement, a flicker of unease passing between the adults like a cold draft under a door. Lila wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the shed, her steps quickening. Elias, sweetheart, come out, dinner's ready. She peered around the corner. Nothing. Just a scattering of fallen leaves and a single red sneaker lying on its side. Her breath caught. Harlan? Her voice cracked like dry wood. He's not here. Within seconds, the peaceful backyard erupted into chaos. Harlan sprinted to the shed, circled it twice, then pushed through the tall grass toward the tree line. Elias! Elias! His shouts tore through the stillness, sharp and desperate. Joran began to cry. Cora stood frozen, clutching her unfinished daisy chain, her knuckles white. Margaret rose slowly, her knitting falling to the ground. He wouldn't go into the woods, she whispered. He knows better. But the truth was undeniable. The boundary line marked by the old stump had been crossed. A trail of crushed ferns and disturbed soil led directly into the trees. And then, abruptly, the trail ended, as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. Neighbors arrived within minutes. Sheriff Dale Mercer, a man with salt and pepper hair and a slow, deliberate way of speaking, arrived with 2 deputies and a German shepherd named Rex. Search teams fanned out through the forest, calling Elias's name, their flashlights cutting beams through the thinning light. Volunteers joined in local hunters, school teachers, even the postman, Mr. Havelock, who had delivered mail on Hemlock Lane for 32 years. They searched all night, they searched the next day, they dragged the creek behind the property, combed abandoned mining shafts half a mile east, checked every cabin and trailer within a 10-mile radius. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors beating the air like frantic wings. Nothing. No footprints beyond the initial trail, no clothing snagged on branches, no signs of struggle, no ransom note, no suspicious vehicles reported. Elias Thornwood had simply ceased to exist, 20 feet from the people who loved him most. The investigation stretched for months. FBI agents reviewed grainy security footage from a gas station 3 miles away useless. Psychics were consulted, though Sheriff Mercer rolled his eyes and called them noisemakers. Tips poured in, some credible, most not. A woman in Spokane claimed she saw a boy matching Elias's description boarding a Greyhound bus with a man in a brown coat. Another caller said he'd seen a van parked near the forest edge around 3:15 that day, engine running, windows tinted, but no license plate, no confirmation. And then, silence. Years passed. The missing posters yellowed and peeled from telephone poles, the search parties disbanded, the case file grew thick with dead ends and unanswered questions, eventually labeled inactive by the county office. Yet, the Thornwoods never stopped looking. Lila kept Elias's room exactly as it was, blue walls with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, a toy truck overturned on the rug, a book splayed open on the bed. Every birthday, she lit a candle. Every Christmas, she placed a present under the tree with his name on it. Harlan quit his job at the garage and spent weekends hiking deep into the bitterroots, carving markers into trees, whispering his son's name into the wind. Cora, once a carefree girl with wildflower crowns and scraped knees, grew into a woman haunted by memory. She studied forensic anthropology at the University of Montana, determined to understand how someone could vanish without a trace. She wrote letters to missing persons databases, compared Elias's case to others, especially those in national parks or remote areas. That's when she stumbled upon something unsettling. There were patterns. Boys, mostly between the ages of 8 and 12, disappeared near forests, often within sight of family, no evidence of abduction, no bodies ever recovered. Cases scattered across different states, Montana, Colorado, New Hampshire, West Virginia, but clustered strangely around protected wilderness areas, federal land, regions with limited surveillance. One researcher, David Paulides, had compiled dozens of these cases under a project he called Missing 411. When Cora read his work, her blood ran cold. Elias's disappearance fit the profile perfectly: daylight, proximity to family, sudden absence, lack of forensic evidence. Even the terrain matched: soft soil, dense canopy, poor cell reception. But why? What connected these children? Some theories surfaced: wild animals, though no claw marks, no remains; runaways, though none left notes or took belongings; foul play by strangers, yet no witnesses, no DNA. Others whispered about more troubling possibilities: coordinated abductions, underground networks, or something darker, something the official reports refused to acknowledge. Then came the rumors. Hunters in the Bitterroots spoke in hushed tones about figures seen deep in the woods, tall, unnaturally still, moving without sound. Old-timers recalled stories from native elders about the vanishing people, spirits said to dwell in the high timber, who took children who strayed too far. Some believed the forest itself had a consciousness, a hunger. Sheriff Mercer dismissed such talk. "Grief makes people see ghosts," he said once, leaning against his cruiser outside the diner on Main Street. Truth is, sometimes bad things happen for no reason, and sometimes we never get answers. But Cora couldn't accept that. In the spring of 2016, 17 years after Elias vanished, she returned to Pine Hollow with a team of researchers and a drone equipped with thermal imaging. They scanned the forest floor, focusing on the area just beyond the stump. On the third day, the drone detected an anomaly, a shallow depression in the earth, roughly the size of a child, partially concealed by roots and moss. Soil samples revealed traces of human decomposition, but DNA testing yielded inconclusive results. Too degraded, too old. Still, it was something. That night, Cora sat on the porch of the old house, now weathered and quiet, rocking in her grandmother's chair. The stars blinked above, cold and distant. A breeze stirred the pines, whispering through the needles like voices just below hearing. And then, faintly, she heard it. A giggle, high-pitched, familiar. It came from the edge of the woods. She stood, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the darkness. "Elias?" she whispered. No answer, only the wind. But the next morning, nestled among the roots of the old oak, they found it a small wooden horse, hand-carved, one ear chipped. It had belonged to Elias. He'd carried it everywhere. It was gone the day he disappeared. Now it was back. No fingerprints, no footprints, just the toy, resting on a bed of pine cones as if placed there with care. The local news picked up the story briefly. Ghostly return read one headline. Mystery deepens in cold case, said another. But soon, attention faded. Life moved on. Except for Cora. She now lives in Pine Hollow year-round, working from a home office filled with maps, photographs, and binders labeled Project Echo, her personal archive dedicated to unresolved disappearances. She gives lectures at universities, appears on podcasts, urges families to speak up, to question, to remember, and every October 14th at precisely 3:28 in the afternoon, she walks to the edge of the woods, stands at the moss-covered stump, and calls her brother's name. Sometimes, she says, the wind answers. Other times, the silence is unbearable. But she continues, because as long as one person remembers, Elias Thornwood is not truly gone. And perhaps, just perhaps, he is waiting. Waiting for someone to finally listen. To finally look not just outward into the trees, but inward into the spaces between memory and myth, where truth sometimes hides in plain sight. Like a child behind a garden shed, smiling, counting down until someone finds him, or until the forest takes another. He robbed banks without saying a word. The note was for police only. In the quiet hours of a late autumn morning, when frost still clung to the sidewalks of suburban Cleveland and the sun had barely risen above the steel-gray rooftops, a man walked into the Huntington National Bank on East 93rd Street with nothing but a folded piece of paper in his hand. It was the year 2013, November the 12th, just past 9 o'clock, and the air inside the bank was warm too, warm filled with the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of coffee from the lobby dispenser. He wore a navy blue windbreaker, unzipped, over a plain gray hoodie, jeans that had seen too many washes, and scuffed work boots. Nothing about him stood out, not his height, not his build, not even the way he moved. Calm, deliberate, silent. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? He approached the second teller window where a woman named Marjorie, her name tag slightly crooked, was counting change into a tray. She looked up, smiled politely, and said, "Good morning. How can I help you?" He didn't return the smile, didn't speak. Instead, he slid the folded note across the counter. Marjorie picked it up, unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the neatly printed words. "This is a robbery. Put $10,000 in this bag. No die packs, no marked bills. I am armed. Do not alert police. This note is for you only. After I leave, call them." Beneath it, a small brown paper sack lay flat, like something from a grocery run. Her fingers trembled, her breath caught. She glanced up. He hadn't moved. His hands were empty, palms down on the counter, but his eyes, they held hers. Not angry, not wild, just steady, cold, like ice over deep water. She nodded once, turned quietly, and began gathering bills from her drawer. 10 stacks of $100 bills. She placed them carefully into the bag, sealed it with a fold, and pushed it back toward him. He took it, slid it under his jacket. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out the front door, disappearing into the pale morning light. No alarm, no shouting, no panic at first. It wasn't until 2 minutes later, when Marjorie finally pressed the silent button beneath her desk, that the chaos began. Police arrived within 4 minutes, officers Reyes and Holloway from the 5th District rolling up in a marked cruiser, lights flashing, but sirens off. By then, the man was gone, vanished. Surveillance footage showed him exiting the bank, adjusting his hood, turning left onto Euclid Avenue, walking at a normal pace, no running, no urgency, before cutting through an alley behind a shuttered laundromat. The camera lost him there. But the note? The note remained, and it would become the thread that unraveled one of the most peculiar bank robbery sprees in modern American history. His name was Thaddeus Vale. Born in 1987 in Youngstown, Ohio, a rusted city where factories once roared but now stood silent, skeletons of steel and brick overtaken by weeds and time, Thaddeus was the son of a mechanic and a school cafeteria worker raised in a modest bungalow on Glenwood Drive where the paint peeled in summer and the furnace rattled all winter. He was bright top of his class at Rayen High, fluent in algebra and physics, could take apart a carburetor and rebuild it blindfolded, but life had a way of bending people in ways they couldn't predict. After high school, he enrolled at Kent State University on a partial scholarship, studying mechanical engineering. But halfway through his sophomore year, his mother fell ill, pancreatic cancer, aggressive and swift. The medical bills piled up, insurance didn't cover everything. Thaddeus dropped out to care for her, working double shifts at a warehouse in Akron, hauling boxes from midnight to dawn. She passed in the spring of 2010, and when she did, something in him cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. He drifted after that, lived in motels with weekly rates, took odd jobs, janitorial work, tree trimming, snow plowing, never stayed in one place longer than a few months. He avoided people, spoke little, read constantly philosophy, criminology, old detective novels, and somewhere in those pages, in the quiet solitude of motel rooms lit by flickering lamps, an idea formed. If banks were machines, then perhaps they could be manipulated like any other mechanism. Clean, precise, no violence, no hostages, just a message, a demand, a transaction. And so, in the fall of 2013, Thaddeus Vale began his campaign. The Huntington robbery was the first, but not the last. 3 days later, on November the 15th, another note appeared, this time at a PNC branch in Parma, Ohio. Same handwriting, same calm, chilling tone, $10,000. In cash. No tricks. I will not harm anyone, but I am armed. Leave the money in the bag, walk away, call police when I'm gone. Again, no words spoken. Again, the teller complied. Again, he vanished. Then, on November the 18th, a third bank, Fifth Third, this time in Medina, same method, same silence, same result. By now, local news had caught wind. Headlines screamed, "Silent Bandit strikes again." Police released grainy stills from security footage back of headshots, blurred faces, a man in a hoodie moving like a shadow between buildings. Task forces were assembled. Detectives pored over maps, timelines, witness statements, but Thaddeus was careful, meticulous. He never used the same route twice, always entered during shift changes, when attention wavered, always chose branches with minimal security presence, and always always left the note as his only voice. What made him different wasn't just the silence, it was the precision, the lack of greed. 10,000 each time, never more, never less, no demands for 20s or 50s, always hundreds. Easy to carry, easy to hide, and never once did he threaten a teller beyond the written warning. Never raised his voice, never reached for a weapon, yet every note carried the same phrase, "I am armed." Was he? Police couldn't say for sure. No gun was ever seen, no bulge in his jacket captured on camera, but the words alone were enough. Fear doesn't need a barrel to be real. As the spree continued, 4 banks in 5 weeks, the FBI got involved. Special Agent Lorna Keene, a veteran of the Cleveland field office, took point. Sharp-eyed, mid-40s, with a reputation for solving cold cases through patience and pattern recognition, she studied every detail. The notes, the timing, the geography. She noticed something others missed. All the banks were within a 30-mile radius of Cleveland. All were mid-sized branches, not the biggest, not the smallest. All had similar layouts, 2 teller windows near the entrance, security cameras angled slightly downward, no armed guards on duty, and all were robbed between 9:15 and 10 o'clock in the morning, just after opening, before the lunch rush. More telling? Each location was near a public transit line. Bus routes, rail stations, places where a person could disappear into the flow of daily commuters. Agent Keene also studied the handwriting. Not rushed, not scribbled. Carefully printed block letters, evenly spaced, almost typewritten in their consistency, no smudges, no corrections. Whoever wrote these notes had practiced, repeatedly. And then there was the language. "I will not harm anyone." That phrase appeared in 3 of the 5 notes. Not typical for a robber. Most threats are vague, aggressive, designed to intimidate. But this sounded almost apologetic, defensive, as if he needed to justify his actions even to himself. Keene leaned back in her chair one evening, the glow of her computer screen casting long shadows across her office. Outside, rain tapped against the window. She stared at the timeline, pinned to the wall, 5 red dots marking the banks, connected by thin black lines showing possible escape routes. "He's not a criminal," she murmured. "He's a machine." Her partner, Agent Darnell, looked up from his coffee. "What?" "This isn't random. It's procedural. Every move calculated, every word chosen. He's not trying to get rich. He's trying to prove something." "Prove what?" Keene didn't answer. Not yet. Meanwhile, Thaddeus had moved on. By December the 3rd, he struck again, this time in Elyria, a quiet city west of Cleveland. Another bank, another note, another 10,000. But this time, something changed. The teller, a young man named Calvin, hesitated. He read the note, looked up, saw Thaddeus standing there, motionless. Something in his eyes, maybe the exhaustion, maybe the sorrow, made Calvin pause. Instead of reaching for the money, he wrote a note of his own on a scrap of paper. "Are you okay?" He slid it across the counter. Thaddeus blinked. For the first time in weeks, his expression shifted. Just slightly. A flicker. Confusion. Surprise. He looked at the words, then back at Calvin. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket, not for a weapon, but for a pen. He wrote beneath Calvin's question, "I have to do this. Please, just give me the money." Calvin nodded, fetched the cash, handed it over. And Thaddeus left. But that exchange haunted him. That night, in a dimly lit motel room on Oberlin Road, he sat on the edge of the bed, the stolen money stacked neatly on the dresser. He hadn't spent $1, not one. The bags remained sealed. He hadn't bought food, clothes, shelter, nothing. He opened a notebook, thick, leather-bound, filled with equations, diagrams, lists. On the latest page, he had written, objective, $60,000. Purpose, clear debt, restore dignity, end cycle. 60,000. That was the number. The sum of his mother's unpaid medical bills. The balance that had ruined his credit, barred him from loans, kept him from rebuilding. 60,000, and he was halfway there. But now, Calvin's question echoed in his mind. "Are you okay?" No, he wasn't. He hadn't slept through the night in months. Dreams of his mother calling his name from a dark hallway, waking up, sweating, heart pounding. The weight of the lie, the fiction he'd created, pressed on his chest like a stone. He wasn't a monster, but He wasn't innocent either. On December the 9th, he entered a key bank in Lorraine. Same routine, same note, same silence. But as he waited for the teller to gather the money, he noticed something different. A photo on her desk. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, smiling in a yellow dress. Beside it, a small Christmas ornament, handmade, glued-on glitter, crooked star on top. His throat tightened. For the first time, he looked around. Really looked. The bank wasn't just a machine, it was full of people. A man in a suit tapping his foot, waiting to deposit a paycheck. An elderly woman struggling with her purse. A janitor mopping the far corner, humming softly. These weren't cogs, they were lives. And he was disrupting them. When the teller handed him the bag, he didn't take it immediately. He stared at it. Then at her. Her name tag read Nadia. She gave a small, nervous nod. He whispered so low, only she could hear, "I'm sorry." Then he turned and walked out. But not far. He didn't go to the alley. Didn't vanish. Instead, he sat on a bench outside a gas station half a block away, the bag at his feet, his head in his hands. 20 minutes later, Officer Reyes, same officer from the first robbery, pulled up, responding to a call about a suspicious person. He recognized the description. Hoodie, windbreaker, sitting still. He approached slowly, hand near his sidearm. "Sir, you all right?" Thaddeus didn't look up. "I robbed 5 banks," he said, voice hollow. "The money's in the bag. I didn't spend it. I want to turn myself in." Reyes froze. "You what?" "I have the notes. Everything. I'll cooperate. Just don't shoot me." And just like that, it was over. Back at the station, Thaddeus was processed quietly. No cuffs at first, no shouting. When Agent Keene entered the interrogation room, she studied him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected," she said. He looked up. "I'm not who I thought I was either." She Saturday, "Why? Why do this?" He exhaled. "To pay my mother's debts, to stop feeling like a failure. I thought if I could fix that one thing, maybe I could start over." And the silence? "I didn't want to scare anyone. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Words, they can make things worse. But a note, you can read it, decide how to respond, gives people control." Keene leaned forward. "You wrote, 'I am armed every time.' Were you?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I wasn't. But I knew they'd believe it. Fear works faster than truth." She nodded slowly. "You're smarter than most people who do this. That's why you lasted so long. But not smart enough to know it wouldn't fix anything." "No," she agreed. "Money rarely does." The case made national headlines. The silent bandit surrenders. Note-writing robber claims he just wanted to be free. Some called him a criminal, others a tragic figure. A man broken by a system that offered no second chances. At trial, in March of 2014, Thaddeus pleaded guilty to 5 counts of bank robbery. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and tired eyes, listened to his statement. "I made a choice," he said, voice steady but quiet. "A wrong one. I thought I was correcting a mistake, but I only made another. I accept responsibility. And I apologize to the tellers, to the banks, to everyone I frightened. I'm not asking for mercy, just understanding." The courtroom was silent. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in federal prison, time credited for time served, minimum security, eligible for parole in 3. As he was led away, Agent Keene watched from the back row. Later, she visited him at the Federal Correctional Institution in Elkton. "How are you?" she asked. "Better," he said. "I read, I write, I help teach math to other inmates. I'm thinking." "About what?" "Starting over. Legally. Honestly. Maybe becoming a counselor. For people who feel trapped." She smiled faintly. "You'd be good at that." He looked out the window. Snow was falling gently over the yard. "I finally understand," he said. "The note wasn't for the police. It was for me. A way to pretend I wasn't really doing this. To keep my conscience quiet. And now? Now I speak. Even when it hurts." Years passed. Thaddeus was released in the summer of 2017. Found work at a community center in Toledo, tutoring teens in math and science. Slowly rebuilt his life. Paid off the rest of his mother's debts, not with stolen money, but with honest wages. He never robbed another bank. He never needed to. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't to take silence as armor, but to break it and speak. A. 1972 prophecy predicted the end. What happened next is worse. It was the winter of 1972 when a quiet tremor passed through the small town of Black Hollow, nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills of eastern Kentucky. Snow had begun to fall early that December, blanketing the crooked rooftops and winding dirt roads in a hush so thick it seemed to muffle even thought itself. The air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, and the few residents who braved the cold moved with slow, deliberate steps, boots crunching over frost-laced gravel, breath curling into ghostly wisps beneath flickering porch lights. At the edge of town, near where the old railroad tracks disappeared into the misty woods, stood a crumbling stone chapel, long abandoned, save for the occasional drifter or curious teenager daring each other to go inside after dark. The chapel had once belonged to a short-lived religious sect known as the Covenant of the Final Dawn, a group that sprang up in the late 1960s, led by a man named Thaddeus Vale, whose sermons spoke not of salvation, but of reckoning. He claimed to have received visions during a near-fatal fever in the summer of 1968, visions of fire falling from the sky, of cities sinking into silence, of a great stillness descending upon the earth like a shroud. His followers, no more than 30 at their peak, built the chapel themselves using river stones and salvaged timber, believing it would serve as a sanctuary when the end came. And according to Vale's final prophecy, inscribed in charcoal on the chapel's inner wall just days before he vanished without a trace, the end would arrive precisely at 3:17 in the morning on December 21st, 1972. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Now, nearly 5 decades later, the date stirs faint echoes in those who remember. Not because the world ended that night, but because something far more unsettling took place instead. Something that didn't make the newspapers, wasn't captured by radio signals, and left behind only whispers buried beneath layers of denial and disbelief. That evening, a handful of townspeople gathered at the general store, run then by Eldon Mirth, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a habit of speaking in riddles. He kept an old wind-up clock above the counter that never quite matched the time on anyone's wristwatch. By 7 o'clock, the store was unusually full. Minnie Galloway, the postmistress, sat knitting by the pot-bellied stove, her fingers trembling slightly as she looped the yarn. Young Corwin Bellwether, barely 16, leaned against the glass case of penny candy, staring out at the snowfall with a look of eerie calm. And in the back corner, nursing a cup of black coffee, sat Lyriel Crane, a woman who'd arrived in Black Hollow only weeks earlier, claiming to be researching local folklore for a university in Ohio. She wore a long wool coat the color of dried blood, and her voice, when she spoke, was low and measured, like water moving under ice. They weren't there by accident. Each had heard the rumors. Some said Vale had returned. Others whispered that the ground beneath the chapel had begun to hum at night, vibrating like a plucked wire. A few children reported seeing figures standing among the trees' tall, thin shapes, with no faces, just smooth skin where features should be. And then there was the dream. Dozens of people across the county claimed to have had the same one within days of each other. A vast, silent field under a bruised purple sky, where rows of empty chairs stretched endlessly toward a horizon that pulsed like a heartbeat. In the dream, someone or something was waiting for them, but no one could remember who. At 9:42 p.m., the power went out. Not just in Black Hollow. Every home, every streetlight, every radio tower within a 30-mile radius lost electricity simultaneously. The darkness was absolute. No stars pierced the clouds. No moon cast its glow. Even the snow seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Inside the store, Eldon lit a kerosene lamp, its flame casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. No one spoke. Outside, the wind died. The snow stopped falling mid-air, suspended in glittering crystals that hung motionless between earth and sky. Then, at exactly 2:58 a.m., the clock above the counter began to chime. This was impossible. It was a wind-up clock. It hadn't worked properly in years, and yet it rang 12 times, each tone deep and resonant like a bell tolling underwater. When it finished, Lirael stood slowly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "It's starting," she said. Her voice did not waver. He wasn't wrong, he just misunderstood. No one moved. Corwin's hands clenched around the edge of the candy case. Minnie dropped her knitting, the needles clattering to the floor. Eldon stared at the clock, his face pale, lips parted as if trying to form words that wouldn't come. At 3:17 a.m., the exact moment prophesied, something shifted. It wasn't an explosion, not an earthquake, not even a sound at first. It was a sensation, as if the air itself had grown thinner, as if reality had exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. The suspended snowflakes began to fall once more, but slowly, too slowly, like sand through an hourglass turned sideways. Then, from the direction of the chapel, a single note rose a tone so pure and high it made the teeth ache. It lasted only seconds before fading into silence. And then, the lights returned. Electricity surged back through the lines, radios crackled to life with static, the clock above the counter stopped chiming, frozen once more at 10 past 10. Outside, the snow fell normally, birds chirped in the trees. The world seemed unchanged. But it wasn't. Over the next few days, things began to unravel, not all at once, but in quiet, insidious ways. People reported missing hours. Corwin swore he'd walked to the chapel that night, though his boots were dry and untouched by snow. Minnie found letters in her mailbox addressed to people who had died years ago, written in handwriting she recognized but couldn't place. Eldon discovered that his wind-up clock now ran backward, its hands creeping counterclockwise with unnerving precision. And Lirael? She disappeared the next morning, leaving behind only a notebook filled with symbols and dates. Dates that stretched far beyond 1972, looping forward into the 21st century and beyond. One page bore a single sentence written in careful script. The end did not come. It arrived earlier, and we simply failed to notice. Black Hollow never recovered its sense of normalcy. Not really. Children born after that winter often spoke of dreams they couldn't explain, of standing in line, barefoot on cold stone, waiting to cross a bridge that led nowhere. Some grew up unable to feel fear. Others could not cry. A few claimed they remembered lives they'd never lived, names they'd never been given, cities that didn't exist on any map. The government eventually sent investigators, men in dark coats, who asked questions but took no notes. They visited the chapel, found nothing but dust and mildew, and declared the site structurally unsound. It was demolished in the spring of 1973. No records remain of what they may have seen or chosen to ignore. Yet, the strangest part isn't what happened that night, it's what continues to happen. Because every December 21st at precisely 3:17 in the morning, clocks across the region stop. Not all of them, just enough. And in homes near the old rail line, people wake suddenly, hearts pounding, convinced someone has just whispered their name, the air grows thick, breathing becomes difficult, and for exactly 13 seconds, the world feels hollow, as if something vital has been removed, replaced by a perfect, echoing absence. Scientists have offered theories, geomagnetic anomalies, infrasound waves, mass hallucination triggered by seasonal affective disorder, but none can explain why dogs refuse to bark during those seconds. Why newborns delivered at that exact time never cry. Why, in rare cases, individuals report seeing a figure standing at the foot of their bed, tall, gaunt, wearing a long coat, holding a notebook open in one hand, writing steadily with the other. And perhaps most chilling of all, why some who experience it claim to recognize the figure, not from photographs, not from stories, but from dreams, from memories that don't belong to them. In the years since, scattered accounts have surfaced: letters tucked into library books, audio recordings uploaded to obscure corners of the internet, diary entries found in attics after the owners have passed. All speak of the same phenomenon, all mention the date. All describe that 13th second, the pause in existence, the breath held too long, the sense that something ancient and patient is watching, waiting, counting. One such account came from a retired schoolteacher in rural Indiana, writing in 2015. I was only 6 when it happened, but I remember the silence. My mother used to say, the world stopped spinning for a moment. I didn't believe her until I felt it again last year. It's getting longer. Not much, maybe half a second more than before, but it's growing. And I hear them now, faintly, like voices through a wall. They're calling names, not ours, names from before. Another, a geologist working in New Mexico, recorded a series of seismic readings taken on December 21st, 2019. His instruments detected no earthquake, no tremor, just a single, isolated pulse of energy emanating from somewhere deep beneath the Appalachian Range. The waveform resembled nothing natural. It looked, he wrote, like a heartbeat, but one that shouldn't exist. And then there's the recording, widely dismissed as a hoax, that surfaced on a now-deleted podcast in 2022. It begins with ambient noise, wind, distant traffic, the rustle of fabric. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., everything cuts out. For 13 seconds, there is only silence. And then, just as abruptly, a voice, soft, genderless, speaking in perfect English with no discernible accent, says, "We are sorry, it must be this way. You were never meant to wake up." The recording ends there. To this day, no one knows who made it or why. But here's what no one wants to admit. The prophecy wasn't wrong. It was precise. The end did come on December 21st, 1972 at 3:17 in the morning. But it wasn't the end of the world. It was the end of reality, at least, the reality we believed we inhabited. What followed wasn't destruction. It was replacement, a subtle, seamless overwrite. Like changing film in a projector while the audience watches, unaware the image has shifted. Those who felt it, the ones who woke in terror, who sensed the absence, who saw the figure in the coat, they're the ones who almost broke through. And the ones who remember fragments, who carry the weight of knowing something is deeply off, they're not crazy, they're the survivors of a transition no one else acknowledges. And the worst part? It's still happening. Every year, the pause grows. Not enough for most to notice. But for those sensitive to the shift, the ones who've always felt out of step with the world, who dream in colors that don't exist, who hear music when no one is playing, it's becoming harder to ignore. Time doesn't flow the way it used to. Memories blur at the edges. Faces in photographs seem subtly wrong. Loved ones sometimes speak with slight delays, as if echoing from a room just out of reach. And in the deepest hollows of Appalachia, where the trees grow too close together and the fog never quite lifts, locals still avoid the old rail path after midnight. Hunters refuse to camp near the ruins of the stone chapel. And on cold December nights, when the wind howls just right, some swear they can hear faint chanting words in no known language, rising from beneath the earth. They say Thaddeus Vale didn't vanish, he was taken, not killed, not imprisoned, but promoted, given a role in whatever lies beyond the veil. And the notebook Lirael left behind? It wasn't a record of the future, it was a ledger, a list of names, of souls who resisted the change, of those who might, one day, need to be corrected. So when you hear your clock tick strangely tonight, when your dog whimpers at nothing, when you wake suddenly, certain someone called your name, but no one's there, ask yourself, did the world survive 1972? Or did it merely continue pretending? This desert town exists to hide something. The night siren proves it. The sun had long since collapsed behind the jagged teeth of the Sierra Lamitas, painting the sky in bruised purples and fading oranges, when Elias Thorne first stepped onto the cracked asphalt of Drywater Junction. The air hung thick with dust and silence so deep it pressed against the eardrums like cotton soaked in oil. No crickets, no wind, not even the distant hum of a generator broke the stillness. Just the soft crunch of Elias's boots on gravel and the slow creak of a rusted sign above him that read, "Welcome to Drywater Population 17." That number, he would later learn, was not quite accurate and never had been. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was late September in the year 1997 when Elias arrived, a geologist contracted by the Bureau of Land Management to assess subsurface erosion patterns near the Mojave Fringe. He wasn't supposed to stay longer than 3 days. But Drywater had other plans. The town clung to the edge of the desert like a scab, refusing to heal wooden shacks leaning at odd angles, their windows boarded or shattered, paint peeled into ghostly curls. A single gas station stood open, its fluorescent light flickering like a dying heartbeat. Behind the counter sat a man named Orrin Vexley, gaunt as a scarecrow, eyes milky with cataracts that didn't quite hide the sharpness beneath. He handed Elias a room key without asking for ID, without smiling, and said only, "Don't go out after sundown, especially if you hear the siren." "I think the same." Elias laughed, then nervously, more out of discomfort than disbelief. "Siren? Like an air raid?" Orrin didn't blink, like nothing you've heard. And once you do, it stays with you, in your bones. That night, Elias lay on a lumpy cot in room 4 of the Dustvale Motel, the ceiling fan turning with a lazy, metallic groan. Outside, the moon hung low and yellow, casting long shadows that seemed too tall, too thin, to belong to any natural object. He'd just closed his eyes when it came a sound so unnatural it froze the breath in his lungs. It began faintly, like whine through a canyon, but quickly swelled into a high-pitched wail, melodic yet dissonant, rising and falling in intervals that defied human tuning. It wasn't electronic. It wasn't animal, it carried weight like something ancient being dragged across stone. The siren pulsed through the walls, vibrating the glass in the window, making the metal bedframe hum. And beneath it, almost imperceptible, were voices whispering, overlapping, speaking in no language Elias recognized, yet somehow understood in flashes. "They watch from below," one seemed to say. "The hollow ones, remember." He bolted upright, heart hammering, sweat slick on his neck. He reached for the lamp, knocking over a glass of water. The siren stopped instantly. Silence crashed back like a slammed door. No birds, no footsteps, nothing. He waited nearly an hour before daring to peer outside. The street was empty, but in the dirt beside the motel's foundation, something caught his eye: footprints. Small, barefoot, too narrow to be human. They led from the edge of the lot toward the dry riverbed, vanishing where the sand turned black and glassy, as if scorched by fire. The next morning, Elias tried to ask about the siren at the diner, the Rust Spoon, a dim place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. A woman named Merelda Cray sat nursing a cup, her hair pulled back so tightly it made her cheekbones look like knife edges. She looked up when Elias mentioned the sound. "You heard it," she said flatly, not a question. "I did. What is it? Some kind of test? Military?" Merelda set her spoon down with a click. "The siren calls them, brings them closer. We used to have a curfew during the war, World War II, 1943, when the army came through. Built something underground, said it was radar, but the siren started then. First time, then stopped for years, came back in 1978, again in 1989. And now it sings every few nights." Elias frowned. "Who built it?" She leaned forward, voice dropping. "Not who, what? They weren't soldiers, not all of them. Some wore uniforms, yes, but others moved wrong. Too smooth, too quiet. One of them, he had no shadow." Elias wanted to dismiss her as paranoid, superstitious, but the footprints, the silence, the way the townspeople avoided certain streets after dark. And Orrin, when questioned, simply muttered, "We keep the lights off, we don't answer doors, and we never ever whistle at night." Curiosity became obsession. Over the next week, Elias combed through the county archives in nearby Blythe, though most records from the mid-20th century were missing or burned. What he found instead were fragments, a classified project codenamed Operation Hollow Veil, referenced in a declassified memo from the Department of Defense dated March of 1944. Mentioned briefly, acoustic resonance experiments conducted in isolated zones intended to disrupt enemy signal propagation, but the location was redacted. Only a grid coordinate remained, plotted directly beneath Drywater Junction. He returned with a ground-penetrating radar unit borrowed under false pretenses. Working under cover of darkness, he scanned the area near the old rail spur, half a mile east of town. At a depth of 230 feet, the machine picked up a vast hollow chamber circular, approximately 300 yards in diameter. And inside, intermittent pulses of energy, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Then, on the 7th night, the siren returned, louder than before. This time, Elias was ready. He recorded it on a reel-to-reel tape recorder, the kind used for field seismology. As the sound poured from the speakers in his motel room, slowed to half speed, the whispers emerged clearer. Not words, more like impressions, layered beneath the tone. "We sleep beneath the salt," one seemed to convey. "The door must not open. The watcher is blind, but listens." And then, just before the tape ended, a child's voice, soft, trembling, said, "Daddy, why won't the stars come back?" Elias sat frozen, because that voice, he knew it. His own daughter, Lyra, had spoken those exact words the night before she died in a car accident 2 years prior, words never recorded, never shared with anyone. How could a desert town in California know that? He confronted Oren the next day, waving the tape. "What is this place? What are you hiding?" Oren stared at the device, then slowly reached under the counter. He placed a small object on the glass, a rusted metal disc, etched with symbols that looked neither human nor machine-made. Angular. Flowing. Alive. "This was found in the shaft," Oren said. 1951. By a miner named Heston Pike. He went mad within a week. Spent his last days scratching equations on his cell walls. Said the siren wasn't a warning, it was a lullaby, meant to keep something asleep. Elias's hands trembled. Asleep? Oren nodded. Underground. Beneath the old test site. The government thought they were building a bunker, but they weren't digging down, they were uncovering something that was already there. Long before us. Long before anything. And the siren? Elias whispered. It sings to it, calms it. When the power fails, or when someone like you pokes too hard, the song fades, and it stirs. That night, the electricity cut out across Drywater. No explanation, no surge, just darkness. Elias stood at his window, watching. Every house was dark, except one. A small cottage at the edge of town, its porch light blinking in a pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Morse code? SOS. But no one went to help. Instead, doors locked, windows shuttered, and from somewhere far below, a deep subsonic rumble began, felt more than heard, like the earth itself grinding its teeth. Then, faint at first, the siren rose again, this time not from the town, but from beneath it. And this time, it wasn't singing to keep something asleep. It was screaming because it had woken up. Elias grabbed his gear and ran for his truck. But as he turned the key, the engine wouldn't catch. Again. Again. Nothing. He looked up and froze. Standing in the middle of the road, silhouetted by the pale moon, was a figure. Tall, thin, limbs too long, moving with a jerking grace, like a puppet tested by invisible strings. Its head tilted slowly, unnaturally, until it faced him. No face, just smooth skin, stretched tight. And from its chest, where a heart should be the siren's melody, pulsed outward, vibrating the air, distorting the light. Elias stumbled back, falling against the truck. He fumbled for the tape recorder, pressed play. His daughter's voice echoed into the night. "Daddy, why won't the stars come back?" The figure paused. Then, in a voice that was not a voice, more like dozens of whispers threaded through metal, it replied, "Because we ate them." Elias didn't scream. He couldn't. His throat sealed shut, his lungs locked. The thing stepped forward, each movement accompanied by a soft chime, like glass bells underwater. But then, faint at first, a new sound joined the chorus. From the gas station, Oren had climbed onto the roof. In his hands, a battered horn, an old railroad signal, rusted and dented. He blew into it with all his strength. A deep, mournful note rolled across the desert. The figure stopped, turned. Another blast, and another. From other houses, lights flickered on, not electric oil lamps, candles. People emerged, carrying instruments, tin whistles, hand drums, a warped violin. They formed a circle around the edge of town and began to play not music, but a complex sequence of tones, rising and falling in precise patterns. The siren from beneath the earth faltered. The figure twitched, then slowly, painfully sank to its knees. Its form blurred, like heat over asphalt, and then collapsed into a pile of fine gray ash. Silence returned. But not peace. Oren approached Elias, breathing heavily, the horn dangling from his fingers. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. "Now it knows your voice, knows your grief. It'll call to you again. In dreams, in static. in the silence between radio stations. Elias swallowed. What was that thing? A scout, Oren said. A listener, sent ahead. If the song stops for too long, they send more, and if the song dies completely, he didn't finish. What happens? Oren looked toward the horizon, where the first hint of dawn stained the sky blood red. The sky goes dark, not at night, forever, and the ones below climb up. Elias left Drywater the next morning. Officially, he filed a report citing geological instability and abandoned infrastructure. Unofficially, he destroyed the tapes, except one. The one with his daughter's voice. He kept that buried in a safe behind a false wall in his Denver apartment. But sometimes, on still nights when the power blinks, he hears it a faint, melodic wail, coming not from outside, but from within the walls. And when he presses his ear to the plaster, he doesn't hear the siren. He hears knocking. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. Then a whisper. Let us sing you to sleep. To this day, no satellite imagery shows Drywater Junction clearly. Clouds always seem to gather above it, even in drought. GPS signals fail within a 5-mile radius. And travelers who claim to have passed through often cannot recall the name of the town, only the silence, only the feeling of being watched from below. And if you drive through the Mojave after midnight and your radio begins to crackle with a strange, haunting tone, do not stop, do not listen, do not answer if something calls your name in a voice you once loved. Because some towns exist not to welcome, but to warn. And Drywater is still singing. Divers opened the hatch, the crew was gone, the clocks still ticking. The cold Atlantic wind howled across the surface of the water, slicing through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade. Waves rose and fell in uneven rhythm, their crests flecked with foam under a sky still clinging to stars. It was early morning, just past 4 o'clock, on the 7th day of March in the year 1987, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Vigilant had been dispatched from Port Canaveral after an automated distress signal flickered to life from the coordinates of the Stella, a private research vessel registered out of Norfolk, Virginia. No voice transmission followed, only the repeating pulse of a Mayday beacon, weak but persistent, like a heartbeat fading beneath ice. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? By the time the boarding team reached the hull of the Stella, the sea had grown restless. Lieutenant Thaddeus Vail, a seasoned maritime investigator with the Coast Guard Search and Rescue Division, stood at the edge of the deck, gripping the rail as the swell lifted the cutter sideways. His breath came in short clouds, his eyes scanning the silent silhouette ahead. There were no lights aboard, no movement, just the creak of metal and the groan of stressed rivets echoing from within the darkened superstructure. Something's wrong, muttered Petty Officer Lorne Kestrel, adjusting his helmet cam. He was younger, sharp-eyed, with a nervous energy that flared whenever silence stretched too long. No response to radio hails. No crew on deck. Not even a flare. Thaddeus didn't answer. He stepped forward, boots clanging against the gangplank as it settled onto the research vessel's main deck. The air smelled of salt, yes, but underneath, something sharper. Metallic, like old wiring or scorched insulation. He paused, hand resting on the hatch handle. It was warm, not from the sun hadn't risen yet, but from within. Heat radiated faintly through the steel, unnatural for a ship adrift in 38-degree Fahrenheit waters. He glanced back once. The rest of the team waited behind him, Kestrel, Ensign Marin Voss, and Medic Darren Cope. All wore full gear, thermal suits, respirators, sidearms. Protocol dictated caution when vessels went silent. But this wasn't just silent, this was absent, as if the world had exhaled and the Stella had been forgotten in the breath. With a slow turn, Thaddeus pulled the hatch open. A rush of stale, overheated air poured out thick with the scent of ozone and something vaguely sweet, like burnt sugar. The corridor beyond was dimly lit by emergency strips along the floor, casting long shadows up the walls. Panels hung loose from the ceiling, wires dangling like roots torn from soil. And then, there it was. The sound. Faint, rhythmic, almost musical. Clocks. Dozens of them, hundreds, mounted on bulkheads, bolted to consoles, taped to lockers, analog dials spinning, second hands ticking in erratic unison. Some moved forward, others backward. A few stuttered, frozen between seconds. Digital displays blinked in red, dates flashing nonsensically. January 3rd, 2005. July 9th, 1999. November 1st, 1973. None matched the current date, none made sense. But the crew gone, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no blood, no personal effects scattered. Everything was in place. Coffee cups half filled, logbooks open mid-sentence, jackets hanging neatly on hooks. A thermos sat on the galley table, still warm. Beside it, a pair of gloves' fingers curled as if recently removed. And yet, no one. Ensign Voss knelt beside a wall panel, her gloved fingers brushing over a cluster of clocks wired together with copper thread. "These aren't standard issue," she said, voice tight. "They're not even from the same manufacturer. Some look homemade." Darren Cope moved toward the sleeping quarters, door ajar, bunks made, pillows flattened, as though someone had just risen. He checked the head, the mess hall, the engine room, all empty. "It's like they vanished," he whispered. "Just stepped out of their lives." Thaddeus walked deeper into the vessel, drawn toward the central lab. That's where the heat intensified. The door was sealed shut, reinforced with a manual latch on the outside. He hesitated. Then, with a grunt, he turned the wheel and pushed. Inside, the temperature climbed near 110 degrees. Rows of monitors lined the far wall, all dark except one, a single screen glowing with shifting waveforms, pulsing in time with the ticking from the hallway. In the center of the room stood a cylindrical chamber, roughly 6 feet tall, constructed of polished steel and glass. It hummed softly, a low frequency vibrating through the floor. Wires snaked from its base into a junction box labeled Temporal Feedback Array. Do not disconnect. Thaddeus approached slowly. On the console beside the chamber, a logbook lay open. The last entry read, March 6th, 1987, final test initiated at 2200 hours. Field stabilized at 0.87 terahertz. Temporal resonance achieved. Crew reporting mild disorientation. Clock drift noted in adjacent sectors. Proceeding to Phase 3 despite protocol concerns. Dr. Corwin Hale insists integrity holds. If this works, we may witness causality inversion. God help us if we don't return. Below it, scrawled in different ink, shaky and urgent, we weren't supposed to see it. We weren't supposed to remember. The clock doesn't move forward, it chooses. It chose to erase us. Don't open the chamber, don't listen to the ticks. They're not counting time, they're counting down to when you forget too. Thaddeus stared at the page. His throat tightened. Behind him, Kestrel entered, breathing hard. "Lieutenant, you need to see this." He led Thaddeus back to the bridge. The navigation system was offline, but the backup chronometer, factory sealed, never tampered with, was spinning wildly. Not just the second hand, the entire mechanism, hour, minute, second revolving in reverse. And then, abruptly, stopping. It read, 4:17 a.m., March 7th, 1987. Exactly the time they had arrived. "No," Thaddeus breathed. "That's impossible." Kestrel pointed to the radar scope. Empty. No other vessels within 50 nautical miles, no aircraft, nothing. Yet on the communications board, the tape recorder was running. They rewound it, pressed play. Static. Then a voice, calm, familiar. It was Thaddeus's own. "This is Lieutenant Thaddeus Vale. We've boarded the Maristella at approximately 4:17 a. M crew is missing, systems compromised. Recommend immediate quarantine and retrieval. Do not approach the central chamber. Repeat, do not open it." The recording ended. Silence fell like a weight. Marin Voss looked up, face pale. That was just recorded. We haven't reported anything yet." Thaddeus turned toward the lab. The humming had changed, grown louder, more insistent. The single monitor now displayed a new message, scrolling in crisp white text. Initiation sequence repeated. Observers registered. Temporal loop confirmed. And below it, previous attempt failed. This cycle must succeed. Darren backed away, shaking his head. "We weren't the first ones here, were we?" Thaddeus didn't answer. He remembered the thermos, the gloves, the warmth. Someone had been here moments before, or someone would be, and they'd left clues, warnings, for themselves. Because if time wasn't linear, if the past and future could bleed into the present, then perhaps they weren't rescuers. Perhaps they were echoes. Back in the lab, the chamber began to vibrate. A thin crack appeared in the glass. From within, a shadow shifted. Not human, not quite, but familiar. As if seen in a dream, or remembered from a photograph taken years ago. And then the clock stopped. Every single one. The silence was deafening. For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. Then, simultaneously, they restarted. But this time, they all showed the same time. 4:13 a.m., March 7th, 1987. 4 minutes earlier. Thaddeus felt it then, a pressure behind his eyes, a tingling in his fingertips. A memory surged, unbidden. Standing on this very deck, gripping the hatch, hearing Kestrel say, "Something's wrong," as if for the first time, only he hadn't remembered that before. Or had he? He turned to the others. Their faces were blank, confused, as if waking from sleep. "What? What are we doing here?" Marin asked, blinking rapidly. "We just arrived," Kestrel said, stepping forward. No response to radio hails, no crew on deck, not even a flare. Thaddeus froze. He had heard this before. He had lived this before. And in that moment, he understood. They weren't breaking into the loop. They were trapped inside it. The Maristella wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for them to make the same mistake again. And somewhere, deep in the bowels of the ship, the chamber pulsed once, like a heart remembering how to beat. Months later, the official report listed the Maristella as lost at sea, presumed sunk during a sudden storm front. All hands missing, presumed dead, the case was closed, files archived, survivors, none. Evidence, scant. Just a few corrupted audio logs, a set of mismatched timestamps, and one handwritten note found in Thaddeus Vale's personal effects delivered to his sister's home in Asheville, North Carolina, with no return address, postmarked June 11th, 1987. The note read simply, "I remember the clocks. I remember the heat. I remember saying the same words, seeing the same faces. I don't know how many times I've lived this. But I know one thing, if you're reading this, I failed again. And you're next. Listen carefully. When you hear the ticking, don't follow it. Don't open the hatch. And whatever you do, don't trust the time on your watch." The letter was dated March 7th, 1987. But the postmark was from March 7th, 2024. And in a small attic drawer in Asheville, buried beneath old photographs and yellowed letters, a single analog clock sits untouched. Its hands have not moved in 37 years. Yet every night, at exactly 4:17 a.m., it ticks once, as if reminding someone, as if calling them back. Ohio's Vanishing Room legend turned out to be a crime scene. In the quiet, rolling hills of southeastern Ohio, where the trees grow thick and the fog clings to the valley long after sunrise, there stands an old farmhouse just off State Route 327, near the unincorporated community of Gloucester. The structure, weathered by decades of wind and rain, has stood vacant since the late 1980s, its windows shattered, its roof sagging under the weight of time. Locals have long avoided it, not out of mere disrepair, but because of a story whispered in hushed tones at county fairs and over coffee at roadside diners. They call it the Vanishing Room, a place said to swallow people whole, never to be seen again. For years, it was dismissed as folklore, a ghost tale spun to scare children from wandering too far into the woods. But in the autumn of 2017, when a young man named Thaddeus Mallory disappeared without a trace, the legend took a chilling turn, because what investigators found behind those crumbling walls wasn't a myth, it was a crime scene. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was on a crisp morning in early October, the kind where the air smells faintly of damp leaves and wood smoke curls from distant chimneys, that Sheriff Elias Crane received the call. A missing person report had been filed by the elderly aunt of Thaddeus Mallory, a 23-year-old aspiring photographer from Athens, Ohio. Thaddeus had told her he was going to explore some abandoned properties for a photo series titled Forgotten Corners. His last known message, sent via text at 6:47 in the evening on October 3rd, read, Found something strange at the Gloucester house. The back room doesn't match the floor plan. Walls feel wrong. Then, silence. Sheriff Crane, a man with 31 years on the force and a face lined by both sun and sorrow, knew the Gloucester house by reputation only. He'd heard the stories of hikers who claimed they entered the house and exited miles away, of teenagers who swore they saw a door where none should be, opening into a space that defied logic. But he was a practical man, grounded in evidence, not superstition. Still, when no sign of Thaddeus turned up after 2 days, not at his apartment, not at his favorite diner, not even on surveillance footage from the gas station on Route 59, he ordered a search of the property. The team arrived just after dawn on October 6th, their breath visible in the pale light. The house loomed ahead, surrounded by knee-high weeds and rusted farm equipment half swallowed by the earth. Deputy Marlowe, a rookie with nerves tighter than a snare drum, led the way, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. The front door groaned open with a sound like a dying animal, releasing a wave of cold, stale air that carried the scent of mildew and something sharper, something metallic. Inside, the house was eerily intact. Dust coated every surface, but there were no signs of forced entry, no broken furniture, no struggle. It was as if time had simply stopped. Photographs still hung crooked on the walls, a calendar from 1986 frozen on the month of July. Sheriff Crane moved through the kitchen, then the parlor, calling out Thaddeus's name, his voice echoing through the hollow rooms. Nothing answered. Then they reached the hallway. It was here that things began to feel off. The corridor seemed longer than it should have been, stretching farther than the exterior walls allowed. The floorboards creaked unevenly, and the wallpaper, once floral, now peeling in long strips, pulsed faintly in the draft, as though breathing. Deputy Marlowe paused, turning to the sheriff. "Sir, did we pass that door before?" he asked, pointing to a narrow paneled entrance on the left. Crane frowned. He didn't remember it. They opened it. Beyond lay a small room no more than 10 feet by 12, but everything about it felt unnatural. The ceiling sloped downward at an impossible angle, though the house outside had a flat roof. The walls were covered in crude symbols, drawn in what later tests would confirm as human blood, layered over decades. And in the center of the floor, a circle had been etched into the wood, filled with ash and bone fragments. Most disturbing of all, the room had no window, yet a faint greenish light seemed to emanate from the corners, flickering like old television static. Sheriff Crane's radio crackled. "We've got movement on thermal," came the voice of Officer Lyle, stationed outside. 2 figures, inside the house. One near the back hall. The other, "Sir, the second heat signature is coming from inside the west wall." Crane turned slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the dust. There was no west wall in this room, it faced north. His pulse quickened. He stepped toward the northern wall, pressing his palm against the plaster. It gave slightly, like soft clay. He pushed harder, and his hand sank through. He yanked it back with a gasp. The hole sealed itself instantly, leaving no mark. "This isn't possible," Marlowe whispered, backing away. "This isn't real." But it was real. And worse, it was occupied. Later analysis would reveal traces of DMT and other hallucinogenic compounds in the air, suggesting someone had been burning psychoactive substances to induce altered states. But forensic teams also uncovered human remains buried beneath the floorboards, 3 sets of bones, carbon dated to the 1970s, 80s, and early 2000s. Dental records confirmed one belonged to a woman named Elspeth Vaughan, reported missing in 1979 after telling friends she was investigating a doorway to another place in rural Ohio. And then there was Thaddeus. On October 9th, during a second sweep of the property, K-9 Unit Officer Renata Cho discovered a trapdoor hidden beneath a collapsed section of the basement. Behind it, a narrow tunnel descended into darkness. The walls were lined with photographs, dozens of them taken inside the vanishing room. Faces stared out from the images, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. Among them was Thaddeus, captured mid-stride, unaware, seconds before vanishing from the known world. At the end of the tunnel, they found him, not alive. Not exactly. His body was seated upright, propped against the stone wall, dressed in the same clothes he'd worn the night he disappeared. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were open, pupils dilated, fixed on a point beyond the ceiling. In his lap lay a leather-bound journal filled with frantic handwriting, sketches of shifting corridors, spiraling staircases leading nowhere, and repeated phrases, "It watches, it learns. It remembers names." The final entry, dated October 4th, just one day after his last text read, "I think I'm still here. I think I never left. But something else is wearing my face now. If you find this, don't go back, don't look for the door, it knows you're looking, it's always listening." The case was officially closed in March of 2018. Authorities cited homicide, though no suspect was ever identified. The house was condemned and scheduled for demolition, but crews refused to touch it. Dynamite placed at the foundation failed to detonate. Bulldozers stalled mid-approach, engines dead despite full tanks. Eventually, the state erected a chain-link fence around the property, topped with barbed wire, and posted warning signs, "No trespassing, hazardous structure." Yet, even now, nearly 7 years later, locals report seeing lights in the windows on foggy nights. Hunters claim to hear whispers drifting through the trees, voices calling names of people who've never been to Gloucester. And sometimes, on the edge of sleep, residents swear they feel a pressure behind their eyes, a sensation of being pulled not forward, but sideways into a space that shouldn't exist. The vanishing room, it seems, is not done, and perhaps it never will be. Because legends don't die in places like Ohio. They wait, they breathe, they grow hungry. And they remember. Thaddeus Mallory was not the first. He certainly won't be the last. So the next time you drive down a lonely road, past a house that looks just a little too still, a little too quiet, ask yourself, does the layout make sense? Do the doors line up? And when you pass by, do you feel, just for a second, as though the air has thickened and something on the other side of the wall has noticed you? Be careful. Some rooms don't let go. Some doors only open one way. And some houses, like the one near Gloucester, standing sentinel in the mist, don't just hold secrets, they feed on them. The investigation remained open for months, though leads dried up faster than puddles in summer heat. Psychologists analyzed Thaddeus's journal, concluding he likely suffered a psychotic break induced by toxins or isolation. Skeptics pointed to mold, carbon monoxide, or underground gas leaks as explanations for the hallucinations, but none could explain the photos. None could explain how his body appeared untouched by decay, preserved in a state that defied medical understanding. And no scientist could replicate the phenomenon of the shifting walls, the impossible geometry, the way the room seemed to exist outside normal dimensions. Dr. Corvin Hexton, a parapsychologist from Case Western Reserve University, visited the site in May of 2018. He brought with him electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and a team of graduate students. They spent 3 days collecting data. On the evening of the third day, Hexton entered the vanishing room alone, determined to meditate and record any anomalies. He never came out. Search parties combed the area for weeks. His equipment was found scattered near the basement entrance, cameras smashed, notebooks burned, audio recorders filled with static, and, at one point, a whisper in Hexton's voice, "It showed me the others." They're still walking. They don't know they're dead. After that, the state declared the property off limits indefinitely. The fence was reinforced, motion sensors installed, helicopter flyovers increased. But still, the stories persist. In 2022, a drone operated by a storm chaser caught footage of the house during a thunderstorm. In one frame, clear, undeniable, the back door opens. A figure steps out. Tall, thin, wearing a coat that flaps in a wind no one else feels. The face is blurred, distorted, as if reality itself refuses to focus on it, and in its hand, it holds a camera. Thaddeus's camera. The video went viral, then vanished from the internet within hours, pulled by unknown authorities. The storm chaser claimed he received a visit from men in dark suits who said nothing, only handed him a sealed envelope and left. Inside was a single photograph, his own face, taken from inside his bedroom sometime during the night. No one believes him, but those who've studied the vanishing room know the truth. It doesn't just take people, it replaces them, and the ones who come back aren't really back at all. They're echoes. Echoes with instructions. Now consider this. When you walk through your home, do you count the doors? Do you notice if the hallway feels longer today than it did yesterday? Have you ever stood in a room and thought just for a moment that the walls leaned in slightly as if listening? Because somewhere, deep in the heart of Ohio, a room waits. A room with no right to exist. A room that remembers every footstep, every breath, every name spoken within its walls. And if you listen closely, on the very edge of silence, you might hear it. Not a creak, not the wind, but a whisper calling yours. They found a shipwreck, but it wasn't supposed to exist. It was late autumn in the year 1957 when a group of marine surveyors working off the coast of Maine stumbled upon something that defied every known record, something buried beneath layers of silt and kelp cradled by the cold Atlantic floor. The vessel, partially collapsed but unmistakably intact in sections, lay at a depth of nearly 200 feet just beyond the continental shelf near Monhegan Island. What made the discovery so unnerving wasn't merely its condition, it was the design. The hull bore no resemblance to any documented ship from the colonial era, nor did it match the blueprints of early American fishing vessels or merchant schooners. Its structure was sleek, almost futuristic for its time, with riveted plating arranged in an unusual spiral pattern and portholes shaped like ovals rather than circles. Most peculiar of all, there were no markings, no name, no registry number, nothing to suggest where it came from or who had sailed her. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The team, led by Silas Thorne, a wiry, weather-beaten oceanographer with salt-crusted boots and a permanent squint from years spent scanning horizons, had been mapping the seabed for potential oil deposits when their sonar picked up an anomaly. At first, they assumed it was a submerged rock formation, perhaps an ancient glacial deposit left behind by retreating ice sheets. But as the remote-operated camera descended through the murky water, the image on the monitor shifted from shadow to shape and then, suddenly, into undeniable form. A ship. Not just any ship, but one that looked as though it had been placed there deliberately, like a secret meant to stay hidden. Silas leaned forward in his chair aboard the research vessel Auriga, his breath catching in his throat. "Back it up," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "Just a few feet, let's get a wider angle." The technician obeyed, guiding the submersible drone backward. And there, illuminated in the beam of its spotlight, the full silhouette emerged long, narrow, with a prow that curved upward like the beak of some prehistoric bird. No sails, no smokestacks. Just smooth metal, stained green with corrosion, yet still holding its shape after decades, perhaps centuries, beneath the waves. "What in God's name?" murmured Elric Voss, the expedition's lead historian, a man whose knowledge of maritime archaeology spanned 3 continents. He adjusted his glasses, peering at the screen as if trying to decipher a dream. "That isn't 18th century, not even close. Look at the bow. There's no reinforcement for ramming, no figurehead mount. This isn't built for wind, it's built for speed." The date was November 12th, 1957. The sky above the Auriga was overcast, heavy with the promise of winter storms. Waves slapped against the hull with a steady rhythm, and the air smelled of brine and diesel. Inside the cramped control cabin, tension hummed like a live wire. Every eye was fixed on the monitor, every breath seemed too loud. They sent the drone closer, the camera swept across the deck, or what remained of it. Hatches were sealed shut, fused by time and pressure. One side of the ship had caved inward, likely from implosion or collision, but the other remained surprisingly intact. Then, as the light passed over a recessed panel near the stern, something glinted. Not metal, glass, crystal. The technician zoomed in. Embedded in the hull was a circular window, thick, convex, and darkened with age, but behind it, faintly, something shimmered. A reflection. Or perhaps movement? "No," Elric whispered. "That's impossible. Could be sediment shifting," someone offered, though their voice wavered. Silas didn't respond. He stared, unblinking, because for a fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, he thought he saw a shape pass behind the glass. A silhouette. Human? Not quite. Too tall. Too still. They pulled the drone back immediately. Protocol demanded caution. Unknown wrecks could be unstable, even dangerous. But curiosity, once ignited, is not easily quenched. That night, aboard the Auriga, the crew gathered in the mess hall, steaming mugs in hand, voices hushed, logs were reviewed, charts studied. No vessel matching the description had ever been reported missing in those waters, no distress calls, no sightings, nothing. And yet, there it was. Over the next 3 days, they launched 2 more dives. Each time, the images grew clearer. Inside the ship, via a breached section near the midship, the camera revealed corridors narrow, sloping downward at a slight incline, lined with smooth walls that looked almost molded, not welded. There were no ladders, no handrails. Instead, shallow grooves ran along the floor, as if designed for bare feet or something else entirely. Instruments mounted on the walls resembled dials, but their markings were alien circles within triangles, symbols that bore no relation to any known language. One device, partially intact, emitted a faint hum when the drone's light touched it, a vibration so low it was felt more than heard, resonating through the submersible's frame. Elric spent hours comparing the findings to classified naval projects, Cold War prototypes, even rumored Soviet stealth crafts. Nothing fit. The materials alone, alloys later identified as a titanium-zirconium composite, were not in use until the 1980s. How had such a ship ended up at the bottom of the Atlantic in what appeared to be a state of preservation far exceeding its age? Then came the photograph. On the 4th dive, the drone captured an image inside what might have been a control room. In the center stood a pedestal topped with a translucent sphere, cracked but still glowing with a soft internal light blue, pulsing faintly like a slow heartbeat. Around it, 6 seats were arranged in a semicircle, each molded to the shape of a body, but not a human body. The limbs were elongated, the spine curved unnaturally, the headrests were too large, too high. Silas refused to believe it. It's erosion, he insisted. Water distortion, trick of the light. But Elric knew better. He had seen cave paintings in France that depicted beings with stars for eyes. He had read declassified documents about Project Sign, about pilots who spoke of disc-shaped objects over New Mexico in 1947. This was different. This was physical, tangible, buried, yes, but waiting. The decision was made to bring up a sample. A small fragment of the hull, carefully extracted using hydraulic cutters. It was placed in a sealed container, stored in the ship's lab. That night, the temperature aboard the Auriga dropped without explanation. Crewmen reported hearing whispers in the ventilation shafts, soft, rhythmic, not in any language they recognized. One sailor, Jorvik Menet, swore he saw a reflection in the porthole of his cabin, not his own, but a face, long and pale, watching him from the dark water outside. By morning, the fragment was gone. Not stolen, not misplaced, vanished. The container was intact, locked, undamaged, but inside, empty. Only a fine dust remained, clinging to the sides like ash. Panic began to spread. The captain ordered the mission aborted. They would return to port, file a report with the Navy, and let others decide what to do. But as the Auriga turned east toward Rockland Harbor, the sonar pinged again, this time not from below, but from behind. Something was rising from the wreck, slowly, deliberately. Silas rushed to the deck. The sea was calm, the sky breaking into pale streaks of dawn. But beneath the surface, a disturbance formed a column of bubbles, spiraling upward like a vortex. And then, for just a moment, the water shimmered, as if refracting light from an unseen source. A low tone echoed through the hull, deep and resonant, vibrating the bones of everyone on board. No one spoke, no one moved, and then, silence. When they reached shore, the official report cited equipment malfunction, sonar misinterpretation, and possible geological activity. The footage was classified, the logs were sealed, the crew dispersed, some transferred, others retiring abruptly. Silas Thorne submitted a detailed addendum, only to have it returned with a single sentence stamped across the cover. Information not consistent with established records. He never spoke of it again, not publicly. But in the attic of his cottage in Boothbay Harbor, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, he kept a notebook. Pages filled with sketches, coordinates, and one haunting phrase repeated over and over, as if trying to convince himself, It wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't supposed to exist. Years passed. The story faded into rumor told in hushed tones at coastal bars, scribbled in the margins of obscure journals. Some claimed the wreck resurfaced during a storm in 1973, seen by lobstermen off Matnicus Isle. Others said the Navy recovered it in secret, towing it under cover of fog to a facility in Portsmouth. A few even believed the ship was never human at all, that it had arrived from somewhere else, crash landing in the ocean long before history began recording names and dates. Elric Voss, in his final interview before passing in 2004, was asked if he thought the truth would ever come out. He paused, then smiled faintly. "Truth?" he said. "Sometimes the truth isn't something you find, it's something that finds you. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the cold rolling waves off the coast of Maine, it's still waiting. The sea keeps its secrets well. But not forever. Because even now, on quiet nights when the wind dies down and the stars hang low over the water, fishermen swear they hear it, a faint pulse rising from the deep, a rhythm, a signal, as if something down there is waking up."